The first thing I smelled when I walked into the house that morning was the faint trace of my mother's vanilla candles. She always lit them when she wanted the house to look more welcoming, though the warmth they gave off never quite reached our hearts anymore. My father's birthday was in 2 days, and the house was already being dressed for celebration. Streamers half hung, a cake order confirmed, relatives invited. It was supposed to be a happy time. But happiness in our home had always depended on my father's mood and my brother's success. My brother Rehan had always been the golden child, the one who never failed, never questioned, never disappointed. He was the eldest, tall, confident, always talking loud enough for everyone to hear. He had a job in a big firm in Karachi, wore cologne that smelled expensive, and had the kind of charm that made people overlook the sharpness in his words. I was the quiet one, the second one. The one who studied literature instead of business, who stayed home longer, who didn't have much to show off. This year, for my father's 55th birthday, I wanted to do something meaningful, something that might remind him that I still existed beyond the shadows of Rehan's shining image. My father collected watches. He believed a man's watch told the story of his discipline. When I was a child, I'd sit beside him as he wound his old silver Seiko, listening to the soft clicks. So a week before his birthday, I'd taken some of my savings, money I'd earned from freelance writing, and bought a watch. It wasn't expensive, not like the brands Rehan could afford, but it was elegant. A leather strap, a clean white face, engraved with a simple line on the back, for the man who taught me time. When I brought it home, my mother smiled softly but said nothing. She understood the house's politics better than anyone. "He'll like it," she whispered anyway, though her eyes looked unsure. Rehan, of course, saw it differently. That evening, when I came into the kitchen to grab water, he was already there, leaning against the counter in his crisp shirt, talking to my mother about the surprise party. He noticed the small wrapped box in my hand and smirked. "What's that?" he asked. "A gift," I said simply. "For Dad?" I nodded. He laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd told him a joke. "You bought him something? With your money?" I didn't reply. His smirk grew crueler. "Let me guess. A book? A poem? Maybe a frame with one of your emotional quotes?" My silence must have irritated him because he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You know he doesn't care about this sentimental crap, right? He likes real things, expensive things, the kind of gifts that make people notice." "I'm not trying to impress people," I said quietly. "No," he said, "because you can't." That was how Rehan operated. Every word sharpened to remind me that I was smaller, lesser, invisible. I left the kitchen without saying more, clutching the box tighter, trying not to let him see the flush of humiliation creeping up my neck. That night, I sat by my bedroom window, the city's dull hum filtering in through the curtains. I unwrapped the box again, checking the watch like it might suddenly lose its worth. I imagined my father's reaction. Maybe a smile, maybe even surprise. I wasn't expecting tears or long speeches, just acknowledgement, just one moment of pride. The next morning, I went with my mother to help with the arrangements. She was busy checking the guest list, while I helped hang decorations in the living room. I saw the big rectangular box near the dining table, a sleek package that clearly had Rehan's name all over it. He had imported something, probably a new smartwatch or some luxury item that screamed status. I could already imagine my father's face lighting up when Rehan handed it to him. That image stung. Later that evening, I heard Rehan on the phone with his friends, boasting about the party. "Yeah, it'll be grand. I got him the new Omega model. Same one the CEO of my firm wears. He's gonna flip when he sees it. My little brother's getting him something too, I think. A cute effort, you know? Sentimental junk." His laughter echoed down the hallway. I clenched my fists, every word digging deeper. Still, I refused to let anger ruin what I wanted this to be. This gift wasn't about competition. It was about something simpler, something purer, a connection that I'd been craving since childhood. When I was 12, my father had missed my school debate competition. I'd won first place. I still remember how I ran home with the medal, hoping he'd come early from work. He hadn't. Instead, Rehan had brought home a new trophy from his cricket match, And that was all my father talked about that evening. "That's how a man represents the family," he'd said. I'd stood there, medal in hand, invisible. I'd buried that moment, but it returned now like an old scar touched by fresh pain. Maybe that's why the watch mattered so much. It wasn't just a gift. It was a quiet plea for recognition. 2 nights before the party, I finished wrapping it with gold paper and a small white ribbon. I kept it in my drawer, away from Rayhan's curious eyes. Before sleeping, I whispered a little prayer, silly as it sounds, asking God for just one peaceful moment that weekend. But peace is the one thing our family never knew how to handle. The morning of my father's birthday began with the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the warm kind that fills a home. It was the rehearsed, performative kind that happens when guests start arriving. My mother moved between the stove and the dining table, directing the house staff, her face flushed from the heat. The smell of biryani and roasted chicken filled the air, blending with the sharp scent of polish on the newly cleaned floor. By noon, the living room looked like something out of a family magazine. Gold balloons, a happy birthday dad banner stretched across the wall, flowers arranged near the sofa. The table was set with the finest china. I stood at the corner, feeling slightly overdressed in my plain navy shirt. Rayhan had arrived that morning, wearing a tailored beige suit that screamed success. He hugged my father the moment he stepped in, loud enough for everyone to notice. "Happy birthday, Dad. The big 5-5, he said, grinning. My father laughed heartily, clapping him on the back. When I approached with my own quiet, "Happy birthday," my father smiled briefly, polite, distant. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either, just something in between. I handed him a small envelope first, a card I'd written by hand, with a few words about gratitude, time, and family. He nodded, tucked it into his coat pocket without reading it, and turned back to Rayhan, who was already joking with our uncles. As the afternoon wore on, more relatives arrived. My father thrived in that environment, surrounded by people, admired, praised. He told stories about his workdays, exaggerated some for effect, laughed at his own punchlines. Rayhan naturally hovered near him, like a co-star in a film he already knew the ending to. Every once in a while, someone would ask about my career, and I'd force a smile, saying something about freelancing and writing projects. The polite nods that followed were worse than insults. When it was time for cake, my mother brought out a large chocolate truffle decorated with gold flakes. Cameras flashed. My father stood tall, flanked by Rayhan on one side and me on the other. "Say cheese!" someone shouted. Rayhan leaned in, hand on my father's shoulder. I barely fit in the frame. After the cake was cut and applause filled the room, Rayhan raised his voice above the chatter. "Okay, everyone, time for presents." He motioned to the house staff to bring forward a large, sleek box wrapped in black and silver. He made sure the wrapping was torn in front of everyone. It revealed a gleaming Omega watch, resting on a velvet cushion. My father's eyes widened. "Rayhan, my God, this is..." "The latest model," Rayhan finished for him, grinning. "Limited edition." My father laughed, slipped it onto his wrist, and admired it like a child with a new toy. Everyone clapped. "You didn't have to go this far, son," he said. But the pride in his voice betrayed how much he loved it. Then awkwardly, the moment passed into silence. Everyone's attention drifted. I realized it was my turn. My gift, small, neatly wrapped, sitting quietly on the table beside the cake knife, looked suddenly ridiculous next to the glittering Omega box. Still, I picked it up and approached my father. I got you something too," I said, trying to sound casual. He turned, distracted. "Oh? That's nice." I handed him the box. He took it, nodded politely again, but didn't open it. "Thank you," he said simply, before turning back to Rayhan, who had already started talking about how he'd ordered the watch from Dubai weeks ago. No one asked what I had bought. No one even looked at the box in my father's hands. It remained there for a while, untouched, as guests began to leave and music played faintly in the background. I stood by the window, pretending to check my phone, while inside, I felt something quietly crumbling. After the last guest left, I began helping my mother clear the dishes. She looked at me once, her eyes full of silent understanding. She didn't say anything, just gave me a gentle nod. the kind that mothers use when words would only make it worse. My father sat in the living room, still admiring Rehan's watch, showing it to an uncle who had stayed late. "It's a beauty, isn't it?" he said, holding his wrist out proudly. Rehan chuckled, leaning back with that satisfied smirk that made me want to disappear. When I glanced at the coffee table, my gift was gone. I assumed my father had taken it to his room. The thought comforted me a little. Maybe he'd open it later. Maybe he'd see the engraving. Maybe he'd smile. But that hope didn't last long. It was past midnight when I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet now, the celebration over. As I passed the back corridor that led to the trash bins, I noticed something glinting faintly under the dim yellow light. I stepped closer. There, half covered by a crumpled napkin and an empty cake box, was my gift. The gold paper was torn. The ribbon was stained. The box was still there, but slightly open. The watch inside reflecting the weak bulb's light. My handwriting on the engraving peeked through. "For the man who taught me time." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring. I didn't even feel anger at first, just confusion, disbelief. Maybe someone threw it there by mistake, I told myself. Maybe my father didn't know. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Rehan. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk spreading across his face like poison. "Looking for something?" he asked. My voice barely came out. "Why is this here?" He shrugged. "Guess Dad didn't like it." "You're lying," I said, my voice trembling. He chuckled softly. "You really thought that cheap thing could compete with mine? Come on, little brother. You never learn, do you? He doesn't care about your sentimental nonsense. He wants results. Success, not poetry carved on a budget watch." I stared at him, words trapped somewhere between rage and heartbreak. "You didn't have to throw it away," I whispered. "Oh, I didn't," he said. "He told me to clean the table after the party. It was sitting there. He didn't say to keep it." He gave me a long, cruel look. So I figured I'd help him out. I felt something inside me break, the part of me that kept hoping. That small, stubborn spark flickered and went dark. Rehan walked past me, brushing my shoulder. "Next year, maybe just write him a card," he said. "Or better yet, save yourself the embarrassment." His laughter echoed down the hall as I stood there, staring at the discarded box. I bent down, picked it up carefully, brushed off the crumbs and wrapping paper. The watch still worked. The ticking sounded louder than ever, each second hammering in my ears. Tick, 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 it felt like time itself was mocking me. That night, sleep never came. I lay awake on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it whirred above me. Each rotation sounded like the steady ticking of that watch, echoing through my chest. My mind replayed the moment again and again. The torn wrapping paper, Rehan's sneer, my father's disinterest. Every detail carved itself deeper into my thoughts until it was no longer just a memory. It was a wound. I got up around 3 a.m., unable to bear the silence anymore. The house had fallen asleep, but the air still carried the faint smell of cake and cologne. I took the watch from my desk drawer and turned it in my hand, running my thumb over the engraving. The words looked foolish now. Sentimental. Childish. "For the man who taught me time." What had he really taught me? That some love is conditional? That silence is safer than expectation? That the clock only ticks for those who deserve to be seen? I wanted to throw it away again, this time for good, but I couldn't. I didn't buy it just for him anymore. Somehow, it had become a symbol of everything I'd given and never received. The next morning, I avoided everyone. Rehan had already left for the gym, as if the night before had never happened. My father was in the garden sipping tea, sunlight glinting off the omega on his wrist. My mother was watering the plants nearby, her expression careful, as though she already sensed the storm brewing in me. "Good morning," my father said when he saw me, his tone as neutral as the newspaper he was reading. "Morning," I murmured. My throat was dry. He glanced up once, then went back to his tea. Good party yesterday, he said. Rehan really outdid himself. Yeah, I replied softly. He did. Silence stretched between us. The Omega caught the sun again, and I had to look away. My fingers tightened around the old watch in my pocket, the one I'd rescued from the trash. Did you like my gift? The words slipped out before I could stop them. He didn't even look up. Which one? The watch, I said. My heart thudded painfully. The one I gave you. He frowned slightly, as though trying to recall something minor. Yes, it was nice, but you didn't have to get me anything, really. You threw it away, I said quietly. That made him pause. He looked at me now, eyebrows drawn. What are you talking about? I found it in the trash last night, I said, my voice breaking despite my effort to hold it steady. Behind the kitchen. The wrapping was still on it. He sighed, as though I'd brought up something inconvenient. I didn't throw anything away. Maybe the staff. Rehan said you told him to clean the table, I interrupted, and it was there. My mother, still holding the watering can, froze. My father's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt, not regret, but irritation. Listen, he said firmly, setting down his cup. Don't make a scene over something so small. You're too sensitive about these things. It was just a gift. Just a gift, I repeated, the words hollow. You didn't even open it. He looked at me then, his expression cold. Do you want me to lie and say I loved it? You bought a simple watch, that's fine. But Rehan's gift, well, you saw it. It's practical, valuable. You can't compare the two. I stared at him, disbelief flooding through me. So that's it? Everything's about value to you? Price tags and brands? He leaned back in his chair, calm and unbothered. It's about appreciation. He knows what I like. You're too emotional. You always have been. My mother opened her mouth as if to say something, then stopped. Her eyes darted between us helplessly. The anger I'd held back for years started to burn its way out. You know what's funny, Dad? I didn't buy that watch because I thought you'd love it for how it looked. I bought it because it reminded me of the old Seiko you used to fix every Sunday. The one you said taught you patience. You used to say time is about what we give to people, not what we buy. He said nothing. But I guess that changed somewhere between then and now, I continued bitterly. Now it's all about who earns more, who brings you things that shine. Watch your tone, he warned quietly. Why? So I don't disturb your comfort? I snapped. You've been teaching me silence my whole life, Dad. When I won my first debate, you didn't come. When I graduated, you didn't even remember the date. But Rehan, he gets everything. Your pride, your attention, your respect. And I keep trying anyway, thinking maybe if I just give enough, you'll see me too. His eyes narrowed. Enough, he said sharply. I don't have time for your drama this morning. The irony almost made me laugh. Yeah, I said quietly. Time. That's what this is all about, isn't it? I turned away before he could reply. My mother called my name softly, but I didn't stop. I walked straight back into the house, up the stairs, and into my room. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. For the first time in my life, I realized that nothing I did would ever be enough for him. Not because I wasn't good, but because he had already decided who I was allowed to be. A few hours later, Rehan came back from the gym, cheerful as ever. You look awful, he said casually when he passed my room. Rough night? I didn't respond. He grinned. Come on, don't be so serious. You'll get used to it. Dad's just practical. He doesn't mean anything by it. I stood up, my hands shaking, and faced him. You enjoy this, don't you? What? He asked, pretending innocence. Watching me fail in front of him, making sure I stay invisible. He smirked. Someone has to remind you of reality. Reality? I said, stepping closer. Reality is that you're terrified. You need him to love you more, to prove you're worth something. That's why you keep performing. The smile faded from his face. Careful, he said quietly. For once in your life, Rehan, Try being honest, I said. You don't love him either. You just love being the favorite. He turned away, scoffing. You sound pathetic. Maybe, I said, but at least I'm not pretending. When he left, slamming the door behind him, the silence that followed felt almost peaceful. I sat down at my desk, the watch still in my hand. I turned it over once more, reading the engraving for the last time. Then I opened my laptop and began typing. Not for him, not for anyone else, but for myself. Every word that poured out felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me. My voice, my dignity, my story. By the time I finished, the sky outside had turned orange. I placed the watch inside my drawer again, not as a reminder of rejection, but as proof that I had tried, that I had once cared enough to reach out. Maybe one day I'd forgive him. Maybe not. But I knew one thing for sure. I was done waiting for validation that was never coming. Days passed and the house grew quiet again. The decorations from the birthday were gone, the leftover food thrown out, and all that remained were faint traces of laughter that already felt distant, almost imaginary. My father had gone back to work, Rehan had returned to his apartment in the city, and my mother moved through the house like a ghost, tidying what was already clean. For a while, I moved quietly too. I avoided the living room, avoided the sight of that Omega watch gleaming on my father's wrist. But something inside me had changed. There was a stillness now. Not the kind that comes from defeat, but from clarity. I had finally stopped trying to earn what was never mine to begin with. I spent the next few days finishing the piece I had started that night. It wasn't just about my father. It was about love, expectation, and the hunger for approval that eats away at a person's soul. I called it, "For the Man Who Taught Me Time." The same words I had engraved on the watch. Only now, they meant something different. The story wasn't bitter or cruel. It was honest. It was about realizing that time doesn't always heal, but it does reveal who people are, what they value, and who we become because of it. One afternoon, while I was editing the final draft, my mother knocked gently on my door. She carried a cup of tea and a soft, worried smile. "You haven't spoken to your father in days," she said quietly. "I don't have much to say," I replied. She sighed, setting the cup on my desk. "He's not a bad man, just proud. And maybe blind to some things." "Blind to me," I said softly. She didn't deny it. "Maybe, but you're still his son. And I think he's been thinking about what you said." I looked at her skeptically. "He doesn't think about things. He dismisses them." She hesitated, then reached into her apron pocket. "He found this in the kitchen drawer. He told me to give it to you." I frowned, taking the object from her hand. It was the small brown box, my gift box, the same one I'd found in the trash. I opened it slowly. The watch was inside, polished clean, ticking steadily. "He said he thought it was gone," my mother continued. "That maybe someone threw it away by mistake. I don't know if that's true, but..." She looked at me, her eyes full of quiet hope. "He kept it this time." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to believe her, to imagine that maybe he really had thought it was lost, that maybe Rehan had exaggerated. But another part of me knew better. Fathers like mine rarely made mistakes. They made choices. And sometimes, silence was just another form of guilt. That evening, I went downstairs. My father was sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper. When he saw me, he folded it slowly, like he'd been waiting. "I wanted to talk to you," he said. I nodded but said nothing. He cleared his throat. "Your mother told me you were upset about the other night." "I wasn't upset," I said. "I was disappointed." He shifted slightly in his chair. "Maybe I was too harsh. I didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at him, trying to read his face. He wasn't good at apologies. The words came out stiff, awkward, like he was testing a language he'd never spoken before. "I appreciate that," I said quietly. "But it's not just about that night. It's about a lot of nights. A lot of years." He looked down, his hands clasped together. "You've always been different from Rehan. He's..." "Louder?" I interrupted. "More like you?" He sighed. more practical. The world listens to people like him. And people like me? I asked. He hesitated. People like you feel more deeply, but that's not always useful in this world. I smiled faintly. Maybe not to you, but it's useful to me. He didn't respond. For a long moment, we just sat there, the air thick with all the things we'd never said. Then he looked up and said, I read your story, the one you wrote. Your mother showed me. My heart stopped. You read it? He nodded. It's good. Painful, but good. You have a way with words. Something softened in his tone. Not warmth exactly, but respect, the kind I had never heard before. I didn't realize you felt that way, he added quietly. I didn't either, I said. Not until I wrote it. He nodded slowly. I'm sorry, son, for whatever I missed. It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase years of silence or favoritism, but it was something. Small, imperfect, human, and that was enough for me in that moment. Before going upstairs, I left the watch on the table beside him. It still works, I said. You can keep it if you want. He looked at it for a long time, then gave a slow nod. I will. Later that night, I saw him wearing it. Not the Omega, mine. The simple one, with the quiet ticking sound. He didn't make a show of it. He didn't say anything, but I noticed. And that was all I needed. Weeks later, my story was published in a small magazine. It wasn't a big deal, but for me, it was everything. I got a few messages from readers, strangers who said it reminded them of their own families, their own unspoken wounds. For the first time, I realized that the pain I'd carried wasn't just mine. It belonged to countless others who had tried, failed, and learned to love themselves anyway. Rehan called once, months later. His voice was polite, distant. Dad told me about your story, he said. Congratulations. Thanks, I replied. I didn't mean to. He paused, his confidence faltering. You know, that night, I was just being me. Yeah, I said gently. You were. We didn't speak for long, but when I hung up, I felt lighter. I had no anger left, just understanding, the kind that comes when you finally stop asking for people to change and start changing the way you see them. That night, I sat by my window again, the city lights flickering like stars in the distance. The air was cool, calm. I checked the time, the same way I used to when I waited for something that never came. But now I wasn't waiting for anyone. The ticking of my father's old Seiko echoed faintly from the living room below, blending with the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. Time, I realized, had finally come full circle, not to heal what was broken, but to remind me that some things, once understood, no longer hurt the same way. And that perhaps was the real gift all along.